Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We're about to start within 5 minutes, please. We will be starting in 5 minutes. Morning, morning. Could we take our places, please? While we wait, we're going to start. We're running late. While we wait for the rest. Morning, everyone. We've come to the final day of this great event. I would like to thank everybody for their participation. Today is a bit different because I'd like to welcome the Chief Executive Officer of the Retirement Benefit Authority, RBA Kenya, Mr. Nzomo Mutuku. Thank you so much. We're very privileged to have you here. We're going to start with a session as per our agenda. I do apologize for running late, but sometimes we don't want to rush people. Presenter today, Mr. John Ngonda. He's the manager at KPMG Advisory Service Limited and Tax Regulatory Services Department. John has over 30 years experience in immigration services, social security, especially local pension schemes and tax trainings with specialization in personal and individual taxes. He's in charge with the responsibility of tax and advisory services for both local and international staff, advising staff on the tax implication of their employment contracts and emoluments thereof of tax planning for employment income tax, counseling sessions, and preparing individual self-assessment tax returns. Portfolio comprises award and foreign-owned, privately held clients. In addition, he has assisted many foreign companies to start operations in Kenya in a very tax-optimal way. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome John on the stage. Thank you so much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great. It's my pleasure to be here with you. And one thing I've always said is knowledge is for all and expertise is for a few. But even those who claim to be experts, you may not really have the monopoly. And that's why I think forums like these are quite welcome so that we can share what you have and what I have for the benefit not only of our countries, but the world at large. And so my purpose here is to share with you and to take a glance at what the pensions are, what they are doing in Africa. And key, my presentation is the base, the person down there who makes it really possible for all this to happen. Now, talking about Africa, which has previously, decades ago, been viewed as a sleeping giant, it's no longer a sleeping giant. Actually, it's already on board and it is on its feet running. Now, when you cast your eyes around Africa, there are many things that are good and that are happening. when you look when you look at the private sector, when you look at the public sector, the manufacturing sector especially, the health, education, infrastructure, when you look around, all these things are moving in unison. And it's not just one spot, but throughout the continent. And key among the driving factors are pension schemes. It is interesting that forums like these are taking place, and it's quite timely because then we need to share this information we have. What do we need to do? What needs to be done? What is in it for both the contributor as well as the schemes, the countries, and the various organizations that are party to such schemes. I am aware that without the various pillars, for example, the regulators, the members, the employers, and the government indeed, all these pillars are factors that make the pension schemes to be what they are today. And I'm happy that we have some of those regulators with us here and who will share what they have and what they are doing to make such schemes a success. And therefore, mine is to share with you and give a glimpse of part of the tax bit of it, because that is what basically I've gone through before and I've been doing. And so welcome as I go through this. Yes, indeed, Africa, as indeed the theme of our discussion is, has come to the realization that really pension funds play a very big role in our development, in our economy, and to make Africa actually have a mark in the global setup. Now, when we look at developing the economies, quite a few things come into mind. And for example, I'm looking at the Tanzanian case where if you've been there, there is what a kind of an island called Kurasini in Dar es Salaam, and they have built a road, a bridge, a suspended bridge. That bridge is called actually NSSF Kigamboni Bridge. There again, you find the pension scheme coming into the fore. And it's interesting that that particular bridge is 680, I beg your pardon. It is 680 meters, and it was built at a cost of about $136 million. And much of that was contributed, actually 60% was contributed by the NSSF, the Social Security Fund in Tanzania. I beg your pardon. Sorry, I meant to be in slide 1. That bridge alone is expected to be raking in $8 million annually. So you can imagine what the pension schemes are building in this part of the world. It's already operational. It's a 6-lane suspended bridge linking the island, 680 meters, which you actually, if you wanted to cross to the other side of the creek, it took you hours because of the jam. But currently, a few minutes, you're across the island. Just to give you a picture of what this really means, if you look at the size of a football pitch from one goal to the other, that is what we are talking, 7 times that. And it's a few minutes and you're across to Kurasini. And that is just a drop in the ocean. There are many other projects. When you come to Kenya, we have what we call the Hazina, the Nyayo Estes. That's a multi-million-dollar project. It's already in occupation, and that was a housing project. And we have many more that are coming up. We will not, time will fail us if we were to mention everything. If you go to Uganda, I think there are quite a number of developments that the NSSF, that is the NSSF fund in Uganda, has been funding. And some have already commenced. I think there is a project in Mbuye, which is comprised of about 2,740 houses, affordable housing. And you have got other development projects in Jinja that are also funded by NSSF. Now, this is just this part of Africa. How about others? In South Africa, for example, there is quite a bit of development going on there. In Kenya, we are doing all that, and therefore the future for Africa is quite bright. And what we are saying is many countries in Africa are embracing the fact that you need to actually expand your asset base. And this you can only do if you marshal, if you pool funds, if you create an environment where we can actually access liquidity and build our economies. Talking about economies, and this is for real, you cannot build up your economy, you cannot grow up your GDP if you actually cannot invest. And therefore, sure, we have to invest. And to invest then, what do we need to do is to pool funds together. And we need guaranteed pooled funds. Yes, we know in the past people have tried to form such projects, but they have fallen apart simply because they have not been enduring. And therefore, this particular one, and thanks for the organizers, that actually you are bringing awareness. You are actually taking the initiative to inform the public, to inform private investors, to inform governments, not only locally, and I'm happy to know, even internationally, such forums are happening, and you, the organizers here, are participating greatly. Pensions are a critical role in financing through the pooling of funds, yes. And this has been enabled by the kind of reforms that are happening in Africa. And this we need to note. For example, the political front. With the reforms coming in the political front, and specifically I would mention even, in this part of the world, Kenya, with the devolution systems that are happening in Kenya, this is going to be very critical, because when we talk about reforms, we not only talk reforms politically, but even reforms within the machinery, within the operations that are taking place, so that at the end of the day, the enabling climate that is created politically will enable funds, will enable schemes to thrive and develop and invest, not only locally, for example, in Tanzania alone or Uganda, but across Africa and beyond. That way, we are then able to build liquid incomes. We are able to build our liquid base, which is a catalyst for development. And therefore, we need something that will actually form enough funding. When we talk about transformation, yes, we're seeing this transformation happening. Look at what we're saying. For example, if we are to talk of real GDP, real growth, real transformation, real development, investment, we should be looking back at what do we have in our basket. And when we're talking about a basket today, we're talking about the pension funds. Now, one thing I'm very fond of is domestic mobilization. When we are looking at domestic mobilization, and I'll talk more about the Kenyan story, because I'm more conversant with the Kenyan story, which I can defend. We're looking at, in the recent report in 2017, by June, we were worth about 926 billion worth of assets. And within 6 months, it was up by 12% to 1 trillion 80 million. Now that is only the NSSF. Sorry, that is only the established pensions as at 2017 December. That tells you locally we can actually amass, we can actually, in terms of volumes, pool funds together for purposes of development. It is true that because of fear of many schemes, there has been this issue of touching it with a long stick. And that is why you find most of the schemes in this part of the world are underutilized. Yes, we have a lot of liquidity. True, we have a lot of assets. Our asset bases are continued expanding by leaps and bounds. But when you look at what is happening, that second point there, the reforms that need to be done in the administration and management of pension schemes is really required. I am happy, for example, to note in Kenya, this has evolved from the formation of the National Social Security in 1965. It has gone through leaps and bounds, and in the recent decade, many laws by the regulatory authority, like, for example, the NSSF, the Retirement Benefits Authority, the Capital Markets Authority, have played a very big role in ensuring that these funds are properly managed. And with the introduction of laws, I will not delve much into that because they are here and they will share with us. And you see the quality of management that we're seeing today. And if only we could have the political goodwills in Africa, I'm sure we can make much, much more development than what we have achieved so far. Indeed, there is a deliberate move, and it cannot escape our notice that even as we talk about investing in real estate, investing in bonds, investing in others, as we shall see, there is need to diversify. And diversification here, I think we are happy that in certain parts of the world, in certain governments, they are bringing in regulations that are overseeing and ensuring that such public funds are utilized and invested in proper vehicles that will then generate more income for the development not only of the country, but even of individuals. And in this part of the world, we're talking of even our counties. I'm sure you're conversant with what is happening in Kenya and the evolving administrative structures that are being put in place. And therefore, it goes without, it goes with a lot of notice that the PPPs, public-private investment partnership, these are really playing a big role. As we have just seen in that example of the Kigamboni Bridge in Tanzania, where 60% of that bridge was funded by NSSF and the government chipped in 40%. And therefore, what I'm driving at is that when we look at investments, we can and we are capable within Africa to grow and invest the funds that we have to actually develop the various aspects of these countries, including what I'd mentioned earlier, the health, agricultural, infrastructure, and especially this latter one, infrastructure. When you look at Ethiopia, when you look at Kenya with the recent project of SGR, when I look at the Tazara railway that is being modified, When I look internally in Tanzania, the railway that they are now putting up, the electric railway that they're putting up. When I look at Uganda, thinking Uganda already, they're on the drawing board with the SGR. These are structures and vehicles that would move the economies in Africa. These are the structures and vehicles that would actually encourage investment, fast moving. And indeed, if I wanted to move between Mombasa and Rwanda today, and there was the SGR, if I were not flying, if I were passing through the cities, then it would take minimal time. Delivery of goods, delivery of raw materials, not only externally, but even not only internally, but even externally, as we export our raw materials to these other countries. Yes, infrastructure in development is key in developing our individual economies. And now there is also a deliberate move to develop the informal sector, which actually employs the major part of our population. The formal structure is good, but the informal structure as well is better, because therein you have the bottom-up approach. If we really invested in the informal structure, then what we're saying is we could actually raise the base from 10 below there. You could take 5, raise them up, bring new ones at the bottom, and so on and so forth, to become mega investors at the top. And this is quite evident, as we shall soon see. In Kenya, we have 3 types of pension plans. We have the public, we have the occupational, that is employment, and the individual. Now, I'll start with the bottom one, where it is the individual pension plan. Now, this is open to all, because the others are very formal. Now, it is important, and I'm happy that the NSSF authority in Kenya, for example, with the Retirement Benefits Authority, the Capital Markets Authority, they have been exploring ways and means of actually reaching out to these people at the bottom so that they can build their base. And by building their base, they need to enroll more members to such schemes. They need to encourage them to form these schemes. And you can imagine millions down there who are in employment, or who are informally in businesses. They make the bigger part of our population. And therefore, by creating structures, and that is why the kind of reforms we are talking about need to address, and indeed they are addressing, just by having an individual pension scheme in a law, shows that those in charge, or those charged with the regulations, are addressing the people down there. I have been to Uganda, I've been to Tanzania, I've been to South Africa, where these informal sectors are operating, and they are huge, huge, huge. And therefore, there is a need for us, or for the regulatory authorities, to intensify, to build capacity, and reach more of these. And the basic reason is the contributions they have make the basket. They make the bigger contribution. They make the huge impact. And that is why when we talk of top 50, top 100, top 500, we need also to get down there and formulate structures that would be attractive for these people who are in informal sector to come on board. And of course, then we have the occupational schemes. These occupational schemes, obviously, which are ideally for employees, are increasing in number. And I'm happy that the government of Kenya has made it mandatory that people should become members, and employers must encourage their employees to become members of such schemes. Indeed, this is a vehicle that would then bring in transformation, not only in governments, not only in the private sector, but also individually. We have what we call a cash transfer system in Kenya. Now, how this cash system works in Kenya is all those elderly persons, the elderly citizens who are not in formal pension schemes, receive cash transfers from the government monthly. And it's not all the population. Recently, they had a drive of making sure that all persons of 70 years are enrolled so that their health and indeed their economic base is raised by having a few shillings monthly so that they do not rely on their children, for example. In Africa, as we know, we are the employees, those in the formal sector, are the old age insurance for their parents. Now, by encouraging the membership of pension schemes, we are saying we do not want to depend on our children in the future. And by so doing, then, we are removing dependency, so that in future, the Kenya government does not have to do what they're doing at the moment in terms of cash transfers every month. Because again, it's very expensive and does not cover all the people across the country. Then we have the NSSF. The National Social Security Fund, which was ideally formed in 1965, has evolved. And by evolving, I mean both administrative and regulatory. To an extent where in 2013, there was an act that was introduced, but which part of the sections that are very key were shot down between sections 18 up to 20 and then section 70, which is basically membership to a pension scheme, because NSSF used to be a provident fund scheme, which moved to a pension scheme in 2013. Yes, the law is in place, but certain sections which include membership, contributions, and the government guarantee to such funds has never taken off, because a case was taken to court in 2014 and suspended all that. What does this mean? Kenya is still at the lowest. We are contributing, I think, within the region, $2, which is $2 both employer and employee, which is $4 a month. And we were moving to a 6% contribution of the average earnings in the nation starting 2013, which was meant to keep on multiplying so that by now we would be talking of 6% of 5 times the national average earnings. And that would have meant billions in terms of pooling funds and in terms of investment. But then, as we mentioned earlier, the reforms that are going on, both politically, administrative, and regulatory, needs to be strengthened so that you can build confidence in your members, because at the end of the day, the beneficiaries, key beneficiaries, are the individuals. And that is why forums like this help us understand what is happening in the different jurisdictions. What is it that we can learn? What success stories are there that we can learn from, especially in terms of pooling funds and investing these for the development of the countries and indeed the individuals. And so it is very key that when we look or address these types of investments, notable are the pension schemes. Yes, we talked earlier about the assets, according to the 2017 report. NSSF alone, the funds under management, amount to about 66 billion Kenya shillings. But they're running a fund worth 209 billion Kenya shillings. That's quite huge. And therefore, this calls to mind true internal borrowing by the public sector, by the government, for example. It may not be very healthy for the small businessmen because of the interest rates. But we are looking and asking ourselves, Isn't it not time for us to avoid expensive borrowing and actually develop local investments by having our states borrow locally? So that if these funds are pooled and we need to develop fast enough, we should find ourselves liquid within time and actually obtain these funds within time and build the economy, because investments really would need us to have these funds ready. And therefore, when we're looking at 143 billion in terms of NSSF funds, these are managed by 5 managers out there, but it is quite notable. Many of us know about this, and it is quite notable that by so doing, the multiple effects out here are notable. They are visible. We feel them. And therefore, yes, this is the kind of impact that the pooling of funds has. And it's a variety of investments. We're talking of liquid investments. We're talking of immovable property. Within Nairobi and Kenya at large, NSSF owns a lot of properties. You point at any property and you'll not walk 100 meters without finding an NSSF property, both in affordable housing and office block, commercial blocks. This is quite something that governments are looking outwardly to develop. And therefore, the question that begs is, are we doing enough in terms of placing in laws, placing in legislation that on its own manages and administers such properties? It's true, there are permissible investments, and according to the Retirement Benefits Act, we are looking at what pension schemes can invest in. And what the RBA in Kenya is calling for is prudent investments. Prudent investments so that we do not sink, so that schemes don't sink. Yes, we are aware many schemes sank in the past, but should it be the case today in the 21st century? No. And this is the reason why we are always calling upon the regulatory authorities to come out here, and I'm happy we have them here, so that they can put mechanisms, they can put laws, we can enact laws through our National Assembly. They are running these laws on a day-to-day basis, and they know what to strengthen and what to amend and bring to the society, bring to the community, bring to the government, and indeed to legislation, so that such legislation will help us achieve our national goals, which is basically development and transformation. It is good to learn in the next bullet that actually a scheme of that value can invest 100% in government securities, and I'll take you through why in government securities. If we are investing as schemes, we need to look out. I know this has been spoken before, but it's good to resound it again, to echo it again. For example, when we are investing in treasury bills, treasury bonds, what is in it that we are looking for? We are looking at tax optimization. Now, with the treasury bills, it is important to note that whatever investment income you get out there attracts withholding tax at 5%, and that tax is final. As opposed to investing into other vehicles, and the tax rate in Kenya, as we all know, as most of us know, is at 30%. Now, why am I talking about treasury bills? The dividends therein, according to the Income Tax Act, the dividends that schemes would earn fall under what we call qualifying dividends. Now, qualifying dividends, according to the Income Tax Act, attract what we call qualifying dividend rate of tax. Now, that tax, according to the law, is final. And therefore, it's quite lucrative to invest in treasury bills because therein you have tax optimization. You don't suffer tax at 30%, but instead you suffer tax on your dividends at 5%. We are petitioning the government. Why don't they actually take this to interest? Because we also have qualifying interest, but this is only for individuals. And therefore, we should be lobbying the government to include even interest. True, they have created very many vehicles, like for example, the government infrastructure bonds. And important to note here, any bonds that are go beyond 3 years attract no tax at all, including withholding tax. So investing heavily in government bonds is guaranteed. Your returns are guaranteed and they are tax-free. And hence, the list grows, it keeps on growing. The Nairobi Securities Exchange, the dividends there also are quite lucrative. You incur withholding tax at only 5%. And this is very important because then we're saying, are we doing enough? Is this the best we can achieve? And this we can do, as we have seen before, that with the reformations that are going on in the government, the laws that they are putting in place should be able to address this, because at the end of the day, the trickle-down effect from these pension schemes or pension funds is huge and actually helps to create the asset base. It keeps on echoing the same thing, that if we pool funds, then we are able to invest and invest wisely. The returns, on the other hand, are great. They are huge. And therefore, this again goes back to it trickles down to the individuals who would then enjoy massive benefits. We not only enjoy massive benefits at smaller units, but even at greater units, because the infrastructure is there for you to do business. The health facilities are improved. There is a complete 360 transformation within the administrative structures. The post office savings bond, if you invested in post office savings bond, again, this one is a tax attractive place within which the various pension schemes can invest. And we are happy that our fund managers, the insurance companies, are playing quite a big role in this. Because you can imagine managing a billion fund worth, $1 billion shillings worth of funds in Kenya at a sponsor's level. My employer cannot manage that. So that is the reason why we take it to the fund managers. And it is the fund managers who actually have played a very, very critical role in managing these funds, so that on a day-to-day basis, they are able to track where and when to invest. When we talk of registered and unregistered funds in Kenya, the reason why funds are registered is for the very reason of addressing tax maximization, or rather tax minimization. The reason why a fund is registered is so that it can enjoy tax benefits. A fund that is unregistered does not enjoy the same tax benefits as a registered fund. The benefits vary. And I would like to take that slide along with this one, which refers to a 1990. Now, what happened in 1990, prior to 1990, the pension funds in Kenya were two: one registered and unregistered. Now, the registered one used to enjoy 100% tax holiday. In other words, all its investments were never taxed. When you are paying out the benefits to the contributors, you never taxed them. And when you received investment income, they were never taxed. But with the unregistered schemes, their contributions were taxed and their investment incomes were fully taxed. Now, come 1990, the funds were separated, and what they demanded then was, the Kenya Revenue Authority demanded then that you separate the funds that you had before 1990 as a registered scheme, and post 1990, you will still be pulling the funds in there, but in this particular time, we are going to restrict the exempt portion and the taxable portion. And therefore, it was an important thing for anybody that time to actually separate the funds and supply that information, provide that information to the revenue authorities. If you did that today, any income derived from those registered schemes or separated funds then still continue enjoying a tax holiday. How about the separation? Post 1991, you had then these limits which enjoyed tax-free benefits to the employees when they were mature, and also the investment income that was then invested on the exempt funds. Post 1991, we're saying funds that had excessive contribution, like for example, they set limits which were tax allowable, tax deductible on the employees. And then anything you contributed over and above that did not enjoy tax holidays. And this is why then the call for fund managers to invest in vehicles that are tax attractive. This meant that you would receive so much in terms of tax-free elements. But anything that was over and above that needed tax planning. And that is why today we're saying, if you have a registered fund, it would be wise for you to have Fund A of the exempt amounts and Fund B of non-exempt amounts, because those attract tax. However, if you were to go back and invest on infrastructure bonds, if you were to go back and invest in securities, government securities, treasury bills, and bonds, if you were to invest in the securities exchange, then you would actually be minimizing the tax thereon. And at the end of the day, the trickle effect would be higher returns without tax to the beneficiaries. These are the figures we're talking about. Since I'm talking about taxation, it is important, again, and I know it is already implemented, it's working with most employers. That is the amount of allowability that is supposed to serve as an expense against your salary. You have your top gross income, but you deduct 240 like an expense. It is a saving, and that amount is 20,000 shillings a month, and it attracts no tax. It is pushed through the payroll, and it is not taxed. It is a saving for your future, and therefore, this type of money individually goes to a specific fund and goes to a fund manager who prudently manages it and also addresses the tax bit of it. Should you contribute more than 240, that shall be invested in what we are calling a scheme B within the same scheme, so that you can easily monitor the income generated, the investment return that would be taxed on the scheme. But when it is paid out to the beneficiaries, it is paid out tax-free, in addition to what is tax exempt under what we would comfortably call Scheme A within the same scheme. And therefore, that second bit on the Scheme B would qualify as an unregistered scheme because it doesn't pass the test of the exemptions that are allowable. So that comes in as a relief. But beyond the 240, the employee then has a relief. If I were retiring today, I would have an annuity, monthly payment of 25,000 shillings out of my scheme, tax-free. If you are withdrawing, in addition to the 300, if you are withdrawing from a registered scheme, you enjoy the first 600,000 shillings, that is $6,000, tax-free. So if I were withdrawing today, I would qualify for $6,000, that is 600,000 shillings, immediately, that is tax-free. And then monthly receipts of 20,000 shillings, tax-free. Happy am I, because this takes it to a next level. If I'm 65 years old, I would withdraw any amount from a fund tax-free. The government realizes that you're a senior citizen, you have contributed enough to the development of your country, and you should not be suffering taxes anymore. But if you are below 65 and you have retired maybe at between 50 and 65, and you withdraw, say, 1 million shillings, what then? If you withdraw 1 million shillings, the first 600,000 shillings will not be taxed, but the next 400,000 shillings would be taxed at 10%. As opposed to the current tax rates, individual rates, that are little above 120,000 shillings that attracts tax at 10%. Now, if you were to withdraw further than that, further than the 1 million, anything thereafter is banded at 400,000 shillings. And those are the reforms that the government has put in place so that you enjoy a soft landing on retirement. It would suffer tax at 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on and so forth. That would apply for both schemes, whether be it a provident fund or a pension scheme. The only difference is a pension scheme would give you pension income throughout your life. A provident fund scheme gives you a lump sum at the point of retirement. And therefore, when you do a lump sum withdrawal from a pension scheme, all you do is damage your subsequent annuities, your subsequent monthly or annual earnings. You reduce them, in other words. But in a provident fund scheme, you take the whole chunk. Now, the current advice is maybe you could have that money, purchase an annuity. You could go to an insurance scheme and purchase an annuity. So that you also, although being a provident fund, you could actually, like what the government has allowed, it has allowed you actually to transfer your gratuity. If you earn gratuity occasionally, you are allowed to transfer that gratuity into a pension scheme. And this also we're saying, shouldn't the law then also now start allowing somebody to withdraw from a provident, or if you withdraw from a provident fund scheme, you transfer those funds and purchase an annuity. That way you'll be creating a pension for yourself. What is the trickle-down effect? We saw it earlier. You will be drawing from the annuity an income for your livelihood, and two, reduce dependency on the government, which should be doing what they are best at, or what they should be doing, and that is development for the country. Instead of using the same funds again to pay or to do the cash transfers to the senior citizens who are not in any formal pension scheme. And so, yes, it is very important that actually we enroll or we encourage, and the government should form this, or rather should reach out to these individuals, even in the informal sector, so that at the end of the day, what we always say is building a strong nation needs a healthy situation. You cannot be healthy if you're not liquid. And therefore, to be liquid, we need to plan now. Are the structures there? Yes. Across the continent, the structures have been put in place. What we need now is to revolutionize. We need to strengthen the structures of administration. We need to introduce and lobby the government into more lucrative, more tax attractive, tax minimizing schemes where we can then say, yes, we are there. The challenge, and I think this one RBA will help us understand, is where members are members of dual schemes. When it comes to obtaining their benefits, there doesn't seem to be a way in which you may top up those tax-free elements, because you have a pension scheme which is closed and people have migrated into a provident fund scheme. And when you qualify to withdraw your funds, the question that begs is, can you consolidate the funds for maximum benefits? And that has been a question that everybody is asking, and the law is not very straight. Although as a taxman, I say a benefit can only be one. But then the question is, how does it become one as an individual who is enjoying benefits from a pension scheme? Yet NSSF is a pension scheme. I enjoy the amount tax-free. Then my occupational scheme does not consult with NSSF, or my occupational scheme, both ways, in the pension, in the provident fund, individual scheme, if I'm one, does not consult. So there is a lacuna. There may need to be a regulatory framework where there'll be consultation, so that we do not end maybe enjoying benefits that we should not be enjoying. Or maybe sometimes I feel, because I'm enjoying benefits tax-free from NSSF and in my occupational scheme at the same time, that may not, for me, I have no problem enjoying those benefits. But what about the law? Is it something that needs to be addressed? Real estate investment trust is another place that pension funds should be going. And a real estate investment trust basically dwells on or deals in real estate. And if it is registered with the commissioner, the income therein is tax-free, except for withholding tax and dividends. So this is another place that people need to explore, or funds need to explore. Then, of course, with exchange trade and trade funds, this is another thing we need to go into. In East Africa, we have got the East African Community, and that is another place we need to go and invest. How about in venture capital and private equity? All these are vehicles, and it's the trend today to diversify investments of pension schemes, which actually greatly benefits and enjoys tax holidays. There is a need for relaxation of regulatory law to allow for flexibility in investments, and that is what we're talking about. Revolution, evolution, devolvement of laws, and also of schemes to the various levels. And in-house, there is a lot of need to develop in-house. And so what are we saying? What we're saying is Africa is ready for investments. What are we saying? Yes, We are seeing a lot of development. When I talked about rates, real estate, in Africa, in East Africa, we have already done it in Kenya. In Nigeria, they have done it. In Uganda, the last time I checked, they had a draft. They were addressing it. I don't know how far it has gone. And actually, we have got over 21 countries, in Africa, that have embraced the rates. That is the next frontier, in addition to the infrastructure development bonds and also securities and government bonds. This is the next frontier. We also have many Islamic banking products that are out there. We need to encourage investments therein. Because why are we doing that? The wealth of a person, the wealth of an institution, the wealth of an entity is actually decided after your taxes. You cannot be talking about gross wealth. I need to see your net worthy. And your net worthy can only be determined after taxes. And therefore, tax is key. We need to address tax as an avenue to actually limit and optimize these as we maximize our returns. And with that short presentation, there are many things that we need to dive into, but we cannot within the limited time. The finer details we can share off the podium. Unless somebody has a burning question.
Thank you so much, John. That was, you brought us back down to understand what is going on in Kenya and Africa. I'll have a few comments to make, not really questions, just to add on to what you just said. Then I'll give it to the audience to ask the questions. I like the part where you said that public and private sectors should actually emerge in partnership. We tend to separate pension funds in the public and the private sectors completely. And then instead of working together, we then create a friction. So I like that part a lot, where you say that private and public, the public should not only get tenders from the private, but they should actually work in partnership. I like that point a lot. Also, what I noted there was the sinking of pension schemes. And pension funds should actually be debt-free, because these are contributions for the members. So I think what brings about the sinking and the liquidation is more of improper planning and overstretching of investment that are not actually rounded up to bring in income. That should be looked at very closely by the regulator, not only to monitor what is going on, but to come in and look at small funds of how they're actually investing the public money, really. And also, you talked about tax relief on pension at 65, which is really good. But my comment on that is we have countries, this is very common in Europe, where even death benefit is being taxed. Someone is dead, but they're still taxing him. So that should be looked at very, very closely. And the tax that is imposed, and this is the reality, the tax that is imposed on death benefit is even more than tax applied on the actual retirement benefit from someone who is actually still living. So tax relief is one of the major key factors in pension at the time of distribution when we are actually handing over the retirement benefit to the member. Thank you so much for that. And I'd like to see anybody commenting on John's presentation. Yeah.
Thank you, John, for the good presentation, taking us to the basics. My name is Sam Gadumbi, Telposta Pension Scheme. And I want to ask a question, one on the recently introduced Robinson Hood kind of tax on transfers. As a tax consultant, what will be the implication of that, especially on pension schemes, given that this is a tax which in Kenya we are seeing it will affect the pension funds, because when they do investments, the fund managers, when they are doing their investments, there are a lot of transfers of cash when you're moving from one counter to the other. And also when you are paying members who are maturing. So if you are to tax for every 500,000 Kenya shillings, then what is the implication of that when it comes to the pension schemes? The second issue is on tax incentives. I think in Kenya we have around four incentives when it comes to tax. The ones you have said is 20,000 every month, which is tax-free contribution. The other one is the tax-free lump sum of 600,000 Kenya shillings for the maturing members who are withdrawing their funds. And then we have the 25,000 tax-free pension every month. And then we have the age exemption when you reach 65 years and you are drawing monthly pension. My take is that these figures have stagnated for so long. The 65 years, I think we should be seeing it coming down. The 600,000 tax-free ransom, it has stagnated. We moved from 480,000 to 600, and we have stuck at the 600 for a very long time. The 20,000, I think even when I was being employed, it was still 20,000. I think it's an issue when we are encouraging savings in pensions. We should be seeing the government also moving in the direction of making savers or encouraging savings in the pension schemes. I think those are my comments and the question on implication of the Robinson Hood kind of tax in transfers. Thank you.
Thank you. The bit about it, and we were discussing it the other day, the Robin Hood tax that was introduced. Personally, and maybe many hold the view that the country or the government is looking at raising funds. So each transfer you make of 500,000, be it M-Pesa, bank to bank, organization to organization, when you are moving those amounts, because basically you're doing that through financial institutions, your charge is 5%, right? The beauty, or rather, for the moment, you have a reprieve, and the reprieve is Omtata went to court, and the whole bill has been suspended actually. And we were saying, look, already the banks were charging that tax. What happens to those people who are charged that tax? Is it sunk? But when the law was applicable, that is it within those few days. I think, in my opinion, Robin Hood tax should not have been introduced. That is my simple answer. Because I think we have got many other avenues which we can raise monies from. We're talking about pension funds today. Have we as a government fully utilized the pension schemes? The hard facts and the hard truth is no. Why do we go to external borrowing? Why do we want to lift the lid on the capped interest? These are issues that should be addressed. And I think Robin Hood tax, and indeed many other taxes, like I'm looking at what they're doing now, they're pulling in other pension schemes through this bill to be managed under the umbrella of Kenya Revenue Authority. We should be asking ourselves, what is the problem here? Why are we bringing all these pension schemes, including the parliamentary, the WCPS, and all these other schemes, they're coming under the umbrella of the Kenya Revenue Authority? Is it for ease of administration? Is it for ease of monitoring? Maybe my friend from the RB will be telling us very soon. However, for me as a taxman, the Robin Hood tax would have been better replaced by other taxes, because I do not think we have exhausted the avenues. And the truth will, or rather details will unfold as this case sails through the court. Because if Omtata's case is anything to go by, maybe you need to access Omtata's case and the reason behind, the thinking behind the Robin Hood tax that we are fighting down. It's very expensive. What you're saying is you are eating out on somebody's funds that are already attracting withholding tax. There is withholding tax in there. And then in addition, you're saying, if I transfer those funds which have already attracted tax, I need to pay a further tax of 5%. That is punitive, I would say. And in my view as a taxman, I would not encourage it. Perhaps we need to lobby, and actually we really need to support Omtata, lobby the government. And as we lobby the government, the truth is we need to tell them there are other avenues where they can raise revenues.
Oh, thank you indeed, John. That was an excellent presentation. I've just got two really quick comments and then one question. The first one is, I like when you talked about the fact that pension funds are underutilized in the Kenyan market. And it's quite surprising to note that if you look at capital markets, sorry, I'm Conrad Capital Markets Authority. If you look at capital markets, you have a market cap of about 2 trillion. And of that 2 trillion, you have 844 billion, which is from pension funds. And out of 844 billion, a majority is actually in government bonds, which is not a bad thing. However, I like what you said about other products within the capital markets, like the Islamic products that are coming up, real estate investment trusts. So I think as much as people think that government bonds are safe, or T-bills, you've got to realize, like for right now, the reason why a T-bill is attractive is because the inflation is low. Okay, so you're assuming in about 5 years, what happens if there's a systemic shock and the Kenya's inflation goes a bit higher? Is a T-bill able to keep up with that? And that could almost like, finish up the pension fund. So that the opportunities in capital markets, which I'm happy to have a chat with. The other quick point is the informal sector has been a major challenge for capital markets. It's really difficult, not just on the capital market side, but to tell somebody in the informal sector to retire. And I like what RBA did. They've got the Mbao pension plan, which is a really good initiative that attempted that. So I'm really curious during the break to hear what interventions they are for the informal sector in Kenya, which is a large percentage. Now, my question, you mentioned, and this is a learning thing for me, in terms of tax incentives, you said for 65 and older, there's no tax. Now, for somebody who, in the public sector, the retirement age is 60. So that means somebody like me who's in capital markets, I'm still paying taxes even when I retire at 60. So I hope there'll be some incentives, I don't know, from RBA that sort of reduces it to 60 for people like me. And the chief executive here, who's Just wait. Thanks.
Thank, thank you. I think just to dwell on that, if you retire at 60, I think the retirement age, as per, or rather the benefits available under the Income Tax Act, it still talks of 50 years. But then you have a trust deed within your occupational scheme, which says you can retire at 60. But if you opted to retire earlier at that age of 50, you should actually get those benefits tax-free. Yeah. And talking about Capital Markets Authority, I'm very happy that you've commented about that. And on the CMA front, I must say I'm so pleased that Capital Markets Authority have and actually going to be the key regulator on the real estate investment trusts. Right now, it's not fully blown, but as it develops, I'm sure you guys are going to be in there, and it's going to be the real thing, because with property development in this country, in this continent, you will be the key driving factor. And as our convener mentioned earlier, within the continent, that is information that really needs to be taken to the various jurisdictions. It is our prayer that you people are leading this part of Africa. You need to take it out there.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much. Can we all thank John for that presentation? Yeah, we're gonna have a break after that presentation. Sorry, we're running late because we started late, a few minutes. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce another very important person in the Kenyan capital market, and he's already spoken, and that is Conrad Afande. Conrad is the Assistant Manager for Investor Education and Public Awareness in Capital Markets Authority, Kenya. Conrad is currently the Assistant Manager in also the Investor Education at the Capital Markets Authority in Kenya, prior to joining CIMA. And in addition to working for several other companies, Mr. Fande worked for Financial Industry Regulatory Authority in Washington, D.C., in United States of America for 13 years as a supervisor of research and as a senior training specialist. He graduated from Bowie State University in Maryland and holds a BA Business Administration and several designations, such as the CI in total. Mr. Afande has 20 years of experience in the capital markets with emphasis on financial literacy and training. You're welcome, Mr. Afande. We're very happy to have you here. So with that, I'll release you for a break of 15 minutes and be back here for the next session. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Heirs of African private equity. Of course, that's good to hear, and it's a great role to play, but it's a role we don't want to play for free. Well, they can discriminate.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have to call you back. Yeah? Wind up the break and then we can start again. In 2 minutes, please. 2 minutes.
part of your resource team. I'd love to be part of your resource team where I can fit. No, but I'll check it slowly so that I can get prepared. But yes, but we'll check anyway because I had a lot of training experience, and then I dropped off.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we come back to our seats, please? Let's take our seats back, please. Thank you.
Let's get in and settle for the next session. So you can have your coffee and your eateries as you sit.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming back from that break. Our agenda is going to change just a little bit. As I mentioned, I introduced a very important person here as well from the Kenya capital market. So on a sessions like this, we don't want to miss person like that to contribute like this because they do understand it more than we do. So already introduced, I'd like to call upon Mr. Afande Conrad to give us just a brief guidance and expertise of his area in relation to the pension funds. Conrad, you're welcome. You can take the stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Farida. It's a pleasure. Apologies, I don't have a presentation. However, I'll take about 8 or 9 minutes just to talk about a few things. First of all, it's a pleasure to be and hear the discussions because I think the pension industry is so crucial looking at the demographics in Kenya. And I think where capital markets comes in, it's also crucial. And one of the things that you heard in the earlier presentation was, and I want to talk more about that. We talked about funds need to be more aggressive because when you talk about liquidity, pension funds at the moment are safe, which is not a bad thing. However, I'm sure for most of you that were here in the earlier presentations, you heard about from the Nairobi Securities Exchange, you heard about the exchange-traded funds, you heard about the real estate investment trusts, you heard about the derivatives market. The derivatives market is actually something coming in by December. In fact, what we're doing is we're starting a pilot of about 15 intermediaries, and they'll actually trade amongst themselves and looking at the warehousing receipts just to make sure that everything's working, the central counterparties to guarantee the settlements. And then possibly within the first quarter of the next year, you'll have derivatives. And that's where the pension funds comes in. And when I talk about this, I'm not anti-treasury bills or anti-government bonds, but we're just trying to give you an avenue for raising capital for the pension funds. Now, every time that you look at the newspaper, the Business Daily, we always get conflicting reports about the performance of capital markets. But let me inform you that in 2014, the Nairobi Securities Exchange was the third best performing exchange in Africa. Okay, only third from I believe it was South Africa, and I believe it was Egypt. Okay, in terms of the returns on investments at 43%, 43%. And I asked myself, if a pension fund had put a majority of the fund in the exchange, it would have grown by 43% for that year alone. Okay. Now, again, the flip side is anytime you're talking about high risk, there's high risk equals high return. You're not going to get 43% in a T-bill. Okay. And of course, the risks, political risks. I mean, last year, for example, a lot of people were scared about the elections, what's going to happen. And you saw a bunch of people sort of running away from the market. You saw a lot of foreign investors sort of closing down, and that just to wait and see what happens. But eventually things picked up, and now things are looking good. Now, one of the things I also want to mention is one of the things that we're excited about is working with the county. Okay, working with the county. If you look at Kenya, in 2013, we went through devolution, which is going on right now. But every time I go to the county, just about every county, when I look at the level of development, okay, I ask myself, okay, it's been 2013 to now, it's almost 6 years, okay? And the only thing I see really is a lot of hotels that are popping up of nowhere. some buildings here and there, a bank here and there, okay? And that's because the structure of counties to raise funds is not as robust at the moment. And that's where we come in. We're saying we would like to work on a policy framework to introduce county bonds, a county bond, okay? A county bond is where the county government can actually not rely on the exchequer or the Commission for Revenue Allocation. What they're doing is they're issuing a bond. You can raise 500 million and build a road. You can raise $1 billion, okay, and build a hospital. They're all avenues, okay? And then a pension fund can actually invest in a county bond, not a government bond, a county bond. And only when that happens is when you realize and you'll start seeing infrastructure development happening, okay? And earlier on, I gave you statistics. I said the market cap right now in capital markets is about almost 2 trillion. And we have 844 billion from pension funds, okay? And out of that, when you talk about our fund managers, I mean, 15 fund managers are holding 844 billion, okay? And one of them, which I can't say the name, actually holds 299 billion, which is about 29%, okay, of the pension funds. So there's a lot of opportunities. Another opportunity for pension funds is asset-backed securities, okay? If you look at every county, even Mombasa, you know, you have an opportunity to securitize receivables, you know, and receivables will come from parking fees, anything that you charge, the taxes, but you securitize that and package it in a way that you can sell it to the public, okay? And they're actually buying the bond and then you pay them back, okay? And, you know, Mombasa is actually serious because one of the things we're debating about, we had a forum for the county government, and it was a shame that Mombasa is a top tourist destination, yet we don't even have a cruise ship, okay? But guess what? We're actually having discussions where the county of Mombasa can actually buy a cruise ship through an asset-backed security, okay? And by that, you'll actually have more tourism, and that's where the pension funds can also come in. Now, last but not least, you know, we recently launched our strategic plan for 2018-2023. And one of the things that's major about that is innovation and technology, fintech, okay, fintech. Now, if you look at the population, the demographics in Kenya, where you have about 68% are youth, okay? And a lot of the fintech companies are the youth. There's a lot of people with such innovative ideas that can generate income, okay, and increase liquidity. And for that reason, we've actually got policy framework for what we call a regulatory sandbox. And what I'm talking about is where you will have a financial technology product, okay? You have that product, we will allow you to come in a testing environment with a few customers so that we can monitor the activity. So, and if it passes the test, then it's open to the public. So I think you'll see a lot more products on financial technology, the equivalent of M-Pesa and Emakiba for bonds coming in more into the capital markets, and pension funds can also, you know, get involved. And lastly, you know that we've got, you know, one of the challenges that we're facing in Kenya in capital markets is we have a problem with low uptake of the new products. My friend John talked about REITs, but unfortunately, REITs has not performed as much as expected, okay? At the same time, if you look at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, it's about 60 years old. 60 years old, and we have 60 companies. That's one company per year. That's not good, okay? And if you look at the statistics, 87% of all SMEs in Kenya, the companies are SMEs, but they don't want to come to the market, okay? And that's a discussion for another time, whether it's bookkeeping or, you know, no loss of ownership. We can talk about that. But we want to develop a strategy, and that's partly why I'm here today. We want to develop a strategy where we partner with trustees, okay? Because the trustees are the ones that know where to invest the funds. So we want to have discussions with the trustees where we can work together and sort of channel the funds in capital markets avenues that can generate income, okay? Because if you look, I mean, in my personal view, if you've got a certain percentage, you can actually put a percentage of that into high-risk instruments, okay? And then the rest of it you can put in T-bills, in government securities. That way, of course, you don't want to put the whole pension fund in a derivative. I mean, I mean, you don't do that. I would not even recommend that, because what happens if something happens and you lose all that money? But you want to split it, okay? And recently, we actually introduced regulations where 10% of the pension funds can actually go into private equity and venture capital, okay, which is a good thing. Okay, so it allows for companies that generate income, and hopefully the pension holders can actually have more at stake. So that's really what I have in a nutshell. There's a lot more, but I have 10 minutes, and I'm happy to have a discussion and get your card, and we can continue that. Particularly the trustees that are here, I'd love to have your contacts so we can organize a forum to discuss how we can channel investments to the capital markets. We're happy to do sensitization forums for pension holders, which is a good thing for investor education. So that's what I have, Farida. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Conrad. That was a very brief but very detailed presentation. Conrad is still around, and if anybody wants to speak to him or have a question, please approach him after this session.
And I would agree with Yvonne that at
Thank
the
you.
higher, larger deal size and valuation.
I must say I'm very honored and humbled to introduce the next speaker,
If you're not buying
who
the
is
ship,
also our guest of honor today in this event. And that is none other than the Chief Executive Officer of the Retirement Benefit Authority, RBA, in Kenya. Mr. Nzomo Mutuku, you're welcome. Briefly, Mr. Mukutu has served as the acting chief executive of the authority since May 1st, 2017. Previously, he worked on secondment to the National Treasurer as the acting director Financial and Sectorial Affairs, where he was in charge with financial sector development and sectorial issues. But prior to his secondment, Mr. Mutuku was the chief manager, research and development at RBA for over 12 years, having previously worked in the research department of the Central Bank of Kenya. He's well versed with this sector, especially in pension, and I'm very honored and humbled to call upon Mr. Mutuku. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, speaking to trustees and other players, and not just from Kenya. I can see we have people from other countries as well. Yes, so I'm just going to talk about a few things. I'll introduce you to who we are as RBA. I'll talk to you a little bit about how our industry is doing. I think the previous two speakers have some of those issues. I will tell you something about trustees' fiduciary responsibility and their duties and how the investment committee sees them. Since Conrad has talked about investment, I'll also talk about our investment guidelines. Allow you to invest in as trustees in pension schemes in Kenya. And also talk about our pet topic in Kenya today, which is called the Big Four agenda. Talk anywhere without talking about Big Four. So I'll also talk about but maybe just to comment on some of the questions which came up earlier from John's presentation. I think John asked me what happens if you are getting double tax benefits. If you are in two schemes and they are both paying you and they are both deducting the benefit, which is very possible because it's very easy to be in an occupational scheme and an individual scheme. And let's say you're earning pension, and when they are paying the pension, they will deduct the 25,000 tax-free amount. And one scheme will not know that you're earning from the other side, so both will deduct. But really the meeting point is in the hand of the taxpayer. Because when you eventually do your returns, you will only be able to claim one relief of 25,000, which means you'll be left owing KRA some money. So the solution really is at the individual taxpayer level to make good or to advise one of those schemes not to deduct, because eventually you will be caught up with when you will be doing your tax returns. So you can only enjoy one benefit. You cannot enjoy the same benefit twice. Also on the issue, I agree totally with my colleague from Teleposta that our tax incentives have not changed a lot over the years. In 1990, as John said, we moved away from the exempt tax system to the tax exempt system. Sorry, the other way around. We move away from the tax exempt system to the exempt tax system, which means you're supposed to be exempt on the contributions, you're supposed to be exempt on the investment income, and the tax comes in at the benefit stage, which people say is unfair because you're being taxed when you're old. But the reality of it is that by not being taxed at the beginning, you're able to accumulate a lot more. A lot of the pension, the benefit that you get in your pension scheme does not actually come from your contribution. It comes from the investment income. It is the power of compound interest. And for you to enjoy that power, the more you have at the front, the better it will be for you. So that is why we have that system where it's exempt, and then the tax comes at the end, because it means you'll actually end up with more at the end of the day. But of course, if you are able to wait until 65, then you will enjoy exempt, and you will not pay any tax anywhere. Yeah, so anyway, now let me come to my presentation. RBA, Retirement Benefits Authority, has not been there that long. We started operations in 2000, following enactment of Retirement Benefits Act in 1997. We had a state corporation under the National Treasury. And we are an ISO 9001:2015 certified firm. So we started with ISO 9001 2000, 2008, and now we are at 2015. So you can be sure that we follow international standards. We are members of various groups, the International Union of Pension Supervisors. My predecessor, Dr. Odundo, some of you may have met him, was actually the president of that body. That's a body which brings together people supervising pensions from all over the world. So Kenya was quite honored because we were president of that for quite some time. We are also in the East African Pension Supervisors, Central Africa Securities Associations, What you may be wondering is how come we have international, we have East Africa, East and Central Africa, but we don't have Africa. But it's because we are still in the process of forming an association of Africa pension supervisors. We have been having a lot of talks with various supervisors. One of the things about us is that it's a new thing in Africa to have a separate body supervising pension. We are one of the first, after the one which is in South Africa and a few others, we are one of the first. But many other countries have since followed suit. You have Uganda RBA who are here. We have Zambia. We have PENCOM in Nigeria. We have Ghana and so on. All these are new institutions. They never used to exist. And most of them came here to Kenya to see what we were doing, and then they went back and started these institutions. So now we have reached a point where we have a critical mass, and we can now form, an African pension regulators forum. But before we were just too few to have done that. So what does our act say? It gives us our mandate, and let me talk about each of them one by one and how we do them. So number one, it requires us to regulate and supervise establishment and management of retirement schemes. So how do we do this? All the schemes in the country are required to be registered with us. They have to apply for registration. So if you start a scheme today, you have to come to us and get a registration certificate. And for us to give you that certificate, we'll have to confirm certain things. We will have to look at your trust deed and rules. We will look at your setup and so on, and make sure that they're complying with the law. Once a scheme is licensed, we use what is called the risk-based supervision approach. And what we do is for every scheme, and we currently have 1,250 or so schemes that we have licensed. For every one of those schemes, we calculate a risk score. What is a risk score? A risk score is looking at the information available about the scheme. We convert it into a score which ranges between currently between 0 and 4. And 0 would be a risk-free scheme, and 4 would be an extremely risky scheme. So for every scheme, we calculate a score. How do you calculate that score? There are indicators that we use. For example, the expenses. What are your administrative expenses? If you have higher administrative expenses relative to market average, then there's a problem and you'd have a higher score. Or your investment return. If your investment return is less than market average, that will contribute to a higher score. Complaints. If people coming to us to complain about your scheme, that will give you a higher score. If you're not compliant, for example, you don't submit the accounts in time and so on, all that information goes into the system and calculates a score for the scheme. So we have a risk-based approach, and we tend to focus more of our efforts on those schemes which have higher score, because those are more risky schemes. Because we cannot focus on all 1,250, you focus on those where the risk score is high, because that is where things are not right. And those who have low risk score, they don't hear from us much, because things are moving well in those schemes. So that is really one of our core businesses. We regulate all the schemes. In addition, we also license certain service providers. One is the fund manager, who does investments. 2 is a custodian, who holds the assets. And 3 is the administrator, who generally can be appointed to run the scheme. However, in the case of the fund manager and the custodian, we are really the secondary regulator. The primary regulator in the case of the fund manager is CMA, Conrad here. So if one has satisfied Conrad that he is competent to do the business of managing investments, for us there's not much that we would add to that process. Similarly, if you're a custodian and you have satisfied the central bank that you are able to do that, there's not much that we will do. But for administrators, we are the primary regulator, and we vet them very thoroughly before giving them license. So that is the regulation and of the establishment and management. Number two, the scheme requires us to protect the interest of members and sponsors. And to do this, we have a different department, which is called the Market Conduct Department. And this has got three aspects. It's got the consumer protection aspect, it's got governance aspects, and it's also got education aspects. So these schemes, the members, we have an obligation to protect their interests. And if they have a problem, they can come to us and we can intervene. So for example, if a scheme delays in paying somebody who is due his benefits, that person can come to us and we intervene. And this is the area where we kind of interact with the people. You know, the other areas we are more macro areas, but here is where you really get to deal with the human face of the pension system. Because people come to us, you know, they have challenges, and we are there to assist them. And we also try to come up with a consumer protection framework and what we call a treating customers fairly framework, so that the people who are charged with these responsibilities treat the customers, in this case the members, in a fair manner. So on average, you know, we would get around, maybe in a year, we would get around maybe 50 or so complaints, people coming to us with various issues. And we generally try to resolve those complaints within 20 days. Even though the law gives us more time, we try to make sure that we have sorted that person out within 20 days. Because, for example, if you know you are waiting to be paid your money, you don't want to come to RBA and then RBA is taking 2 months or 3 months. You want them to move fast so that the issue can be resolved. The next mandate in the Act is develop and promote the industry. So I'll show you the statistics later, but the idea is to keep the industry growing. And we do this through a lot of education activities that we do. So on the side of protection, we do education of those who are already in the system, members of schemes, so that they can know their rights, you know, their obligations and so on, as well as trustees and administrators and so on. On the side of development is where we are trying to reach out to people who are not in the system and bring them into the system. And I think John mentioned the informal sector. We do a lot of work to bring informal sector people in. Right now, I have a team in Bomet County, and what they are doing is they are going to markets where you have informal sector traders who are doing their small businesses there. And the first step that they do is they do a CSR activity, like maybe cleaning the market. And then after that, you know, the traders are invited for a session where we speak to them about how they can save for retirement. And we go accompanied by the schemes, in this case, individual pension plans, so that those traders can actually sign up right on the spot. So we do a lot of that kind of activity where we go around. We have even done it here in Motwapa recently. We got quite a good response from this kind of people. And of course, we also do other campaigns. Right now, we are also on the local radio stations in vernacular language, explaining to people about saving for retirement and so on. So that is how we try to develop and promote the industry. And then the law requires us to advise. And of course, advice is either taken or not taken. So for example, one of the advice we have been giving for many years is to increase those tax bans, but as you can see, it has not been taken. But we do advise the government on policy issues relating to the industry. And the way we do this advice is through memorandums that we submit to the Treasury every year. And in coming up with those memorandums, the basis is research. So every year we'll do a number of researches which will inform the policy advice that we give to the government. So, for example, last year, and when I say year, we go by the fiscal year, so it ends in June 30th. So we are right at the beginning of a new year. But in the last financial year, up to June 30th, we did some research on what are the attitudes of people towards saving for retirement, which gave us some very good feedback, which will inform some of our policy advice and even inform our education activities in the previous mandate. We did some research on investments, including investment in PPPs, which was mentioned, and infrastructure and so on, which actually informed some of the recommendations we made. We have done something on what has been the impact of some of the campaigns we have been doing and so on. So last year we did quite a lot of research. This coming year, we're going to do something on affordable housing because that is big for agenda. We're going to do something on risk management in schemes. We're going to do something on the informal sector, how to bring the informal sector into the net. And we're also going to do something about the segmentation of the industry. I mentioned we have 1,250 schemes. The number has actually reduced. And the reason the number has reduced is because over time, we have brought these new products like umbrella schemes, individual pension plans, and it is no longer necessary for every employer, especially small employers, to have their own scheme. They can as well save the bother and just join the umbrella scheme. So we have seen consolidation of the industry, which is good because it means we have less schemes, but they are bigger schemes with more members and more assets, which is better than having very many small fragmented schemes. So we do the policy advice, and of course, we do what we implement government policy relating to the industry. So that really is RBA in a snapshot. So let's look at the industry and how it has evolved. When we started, the assets of the industry were less than 1 billion shillings. It has grown, and as you heard, it is now 1.1 trillion shillings, or $10 billion. So it is quite a big industry, relative to African standards. Compared to South Africa, it's small, but compared to all the other African countries, it is actually quite impressive. Like I said, we have 1,300 of score. Now it's around 1,250 because there's that consolidation, and we expect to see more of that. But the beauty about our system is that we have all kinds of schemes. If you look at Tanzania, for example, they have just a few schemes, maybe like 6 schemes, and they're all pretty similar. Or even in Nigeria, they have like 14 or so schemes, but they are all pretty similar. But here in Kenya, you can really get whatever suits you. We have, pension schemes which pay monthly pensions. We have provident funds which pay lump sums. We have umbrella schemes. We have IPPs. We have DC schemes. We have DB schemes. We have the full spectrum. So as an employer, you can really, if you want to provide for your workers, you can really fix yourself where you think suits you best. And we have things like, income drawdowns and annuities, and it's a real full spectrum pensions industry, which is really world class. These schemes have trustees, and the number of trustees cannot be more than 9 by law. And if you have a DC scheme, then you have to have an even number of trustees, and half of those trustees should be appointed by the members, and the other half by the employer. If you have a DB scheme, then the employer can have slightly more representation. I want to and I believe we all understand the distinction between DC and DB. Defined contribution schemes are those where it's just a pot where money is put in and is invested, and at the end of the day, whatever is in that pot is what you get out. And therefore, all the risk lies with the member, because if the investments go wrong, he will lose. Even if they go well, he will benefit. On the other hand, the DB scheme, the benefits are just determined by a formula, depending on the years of service and the salary. The member doesn't really care so much about how investments are going and so on. What is important to him is his salary and how many years he serves. And in the event investments go wrong, then the employer is forced to put in more money into the scheme, and therefore the risk is with the employer. So we have both those kind of schemes, but we have seen a shift from DB because employers don't want to take the risk to DC. They're dumping the risk on their members. We have seen that shift, but we still have both. And actually, the DBs, they are few, but they are really big, and they have a lot of money. Service providers, I mentioned that we license these, so you can see there's a lot of growth. When we started, we only had around 11 managers. Now we have 21. Custodians are 11. Administrators was introduced along the way, and we already have 31 of them that we license. And of course, the other service providers as well, like actuaries and accountants and lawyers and so on, who all provide services to the scheme, but who don't need to be licensed by us. So we have around 3 million members in all these schemes. And this is how the coverage has gone. When we started, it was around 13% of the labor force, primarily in the formal sector. But over time, we have been able to increase that to around 20% of the labor force and brought on board some numbers from the informal sector as well. That's how the coverage ratio has increased. So we have done quite well. 20% is quite high. Again, if you compare to other African countries outside South Africa, most are around 10% or less. So 20% is quite impressive. So that really is a summary of our industry. But let me just show you a slide just to reassure Conrad that we are not putting all our money in government bills. And actually, our investment portfolio is quite diversified. If you compare, if you look at Nigeria, for example, the blue line is the government bills, and you can see it is really huge. But in Kenya, in the overall portfolio, we only at around 30% in government bills. And even if you look at South Africa, for example, you know, the insurance contracts, or what in Kenya we call guaranteed funds, is very big in South Africa. But for us, it is more diversified. You look at Australia, you can see the exposure to shares is quite high. So I think our Kenyan investment portfolio is actually pretty diversified. What is strange about it is the huge exposure in terms of direct real estate investment, which John also mentioned. It is quite high by international standards. And that is why we really support what you are saying about REITs. Pension schemes should not really be investing so much directly in real estate. They should invest through the capital markets, through the REITs product. So we are really hoping that that takes off so that schemes, including now even smaller schemes, can invest through that route, and we'll see a reduction of that brown bar there, which is a bit on the high side by global standards. So let's talk about trustees. What is their role? Trustees are really the most important person in the chain. They are really the legal owners of the scheme on behalf of the beneficiaries. And in Kenya, we require trustees to go through a certification program, which requires them to go for a 5-day training, an examinable training, and they have to pass the exam. Otherwise, they should surrender their seat as trustees. So to date, over 4,000, I think close to 5,000 trustees have gone, including even people from outside Kenya. And you have seen this improving the governance of the scheme. So I said the trustees are most important in the chain. And then we can also have committees. We have the service providers, we have the members, and we have all kinds of other third parties who interact with the scheme. So trustees are expected to act as fiduciaries, which means that they are not supposed to make profit or have a conflict of interest with what they are doing. And it reminds me of a meeting I had yesterday with one of the schemes. This is a scheme which is quite old, and it was there even before RBA came, or even the RBA Act came. So back in the 80s or 90s, during the Moi era, the CEO of the company, in those days there was no RBA Act, so the CEO was also the chairman of the pension scheme, which of course nowadays we don't allow. But he was heading the board of trustees, and he was also the CEO of the company. So these guys sold to the pension scheme some land. You can imagine these are such so many conflicts. He's the seller of the land, he's the CEO of the company, and he's the chairman of the board of trustees. So he sold this land to the scheme, and of course the scheme paid, and it's been in the books ever since. So when RBA Act came, and we kind of demanded that this land should be appearing in the name of the scheme, they went to lands and said, because in those days they used to use the Trustees Act, so the land was appearing in the name of the trustees. So he was selling it to himself because he was the seller and he was also on the other side as a buyer. So anyway, they went to the Ministry of Lands to transfer it to the scheme. And then when they did it, of course, the Ministry of Lands said, wait a second, this land, something is not right. It has appeared in the Ndungu report as having been grabbed from this public land, which has been grabbed from the public. It's supposed to be a market. So, the matter actually ended up in court. It has been a real mess. And we are telling this scheme, we need to remove this land from the assets. Because as far as we are concerned, we are not sure whether this land is actually available for you to sell, let's say, and pay your members. Our concern is that you should have assets which can actually pay benefits. We don't want assets which are just on paper, but which are having all these caveats and so on. So I just wanted to illustrate the issue of not, of course, this guy, he went with the money and, he eventually is retired and, so he profited from that whole mess. He basically sold the scheme land, which was not even his land because it was grabbed land and so on. He has gotten the profit and he has gone and so on. So that is what trustees are not supposed to do. Unfortunately, those days we didn't have the law, but now you can't really do those kind of things. So the trustees are supposed to represent the interest of the employer, particularly when they are sponsor nominated, as well as the members. And they must act in the best interest of the beneficiaries and be impartial between all beneficiaries. Which reminds me of another story that we had in the office. Another big scheme. And they had this member who had been there for 30 years, a senior guy, and unfortunately he passed away. And he had accumulated around 20 million in the benefits in the scheme. So the trustees, when he passed away, of course, the trustees were like, oh, who do we pay this money? So they went to the file, they checked the form which he filled to say who are his beneficiaries. And he had filled his wife and 2 kids, but it was like 20 years old. So, okay, they said, let's do some due diligence. And in the process, it emerged that, number one, from that time he had another child. So now he had a wife and 3 kids. But in addition, he had separated from the wife and married another wife, and they had 2 children. So trustees ask themselves, now, who do we pay this 20 million to? We have the first wife, with 3 children. The form is only reflecting 1 wife and 2 children. We have another wife who has 2 children as well. What do we do? So they decided to call everybody. They called a meeting, and they discussed. And after the meeting, it was agreed that they would share the 20 million equally amongst all the parties. So you have wife 1 plus 3, that's 4. Wife 2 plus 2, that's 7. So they're going to divide the 20 million by 7. Everybody goes, everybody's happy. End of story. But, there's bad blood between the 2 families. So after the meeting, wife 1 came back to the trustees and said, I don't agree. I know that's what we said there, but I'm not going to accept that. And she promptly wrote to us as RBA and said, these trustees are paying. I should get, most of the money because I was the first wife and whatever stories. So we asked the trustees, give a hearing, see what is our case, and then come back to us with a decision. But the trustees have the full discretion. They can choose how to distribute that money. They can even say, we're only going to give, 2 people or 5 people, whatever, so long as they're able to give very clear justification and explanation for how they have come to that decision. So there's no requirement in law for them to, for example, go by the form which the man signed. They are free to vary, and so long as they're able to explain. So the matter went back and forth, and the trustees really found themselves in a difficult position. And what they have now decided to do, which we found very strange, they actually applied to the courts and said, as trustees, we have tried to mediate these people. These guys cannot agree. We have tried to come to a solution. We can't get anywhere. So please, court, can you tell us how do we divide this money? So that point is very critical, that you really need to, as a trustee, be able to be very fair and balanced in the way you do this work. Investment is a key fiduciary responsibility, probably the most important in the sense that, like I said, most of the benefit for a member comes from investment, not from his own contributions or employer's contribution. If you get that wrong, you are really doing a grave injustice to your members. So investment is critical. And that is why sometimes, John, when you are saying that, you have seen those examples of the pension schemes building a bridge and so on. That is good, but it is critical that as a pension scheme is doing that, it is not doing that at the expense of its members. Remember, the first purpose of this scheme is to pay benefits to the members. It is not to develop the country. It is not to support Big Four agenda. It's not to develop the capital markets, Conrad. The purpose of the scheme is to pay benefits to the members and to give them the optimal return. So these other things are side benefits. But if those other things are going to compromise the number one objective, then those trustees can actually be sued. The member can go and say, you guys, your role was to invest my money so I can get the best output. If you decided to go and support a social project, then you are liable. It's good you have done that, you have helped the country, but you have gone against your fiduciary obligation to myself. So trustees have to be very careful to balance those issues. And of course, it becomes a real challenge when markets are very turbulent. Like last year, or maybe not last year, but like 2015, I think was a very tough year for the markets. And, it was hard to find anywhere to invest. I think the only schemes which were able to do quite well were those who had offshore investments. Otherwise, in the local market, almost all investments were bad. So like I mentioned, trustees must go through this 5-day course. It's supposed to deepen their understanding and responsibilities, their legal implications, so that they're able to do the job better. So as trustees, trustees are jointly and severally liable, which means that they should act unanimously, because that decision is binding on all of them. So it's a very strange situation, because you can be in a trustees meeting and you say, I don't agree with this, but if that is the decision which is taken, then you are also caught up, even though you had objected to it. So it's important for trustees to act in a unanimous manner and come to an agreement which everybody agrees. It's very important for trustees to keep proper records. In our law, you must produce audited accounts and send them to us. But more importantly, those accounts must be available for your members to inspect. And it's an area where we have a lot of challenges sometimes, because members go to the trustees and ask for the accounts, and they're like, no, we sent them to RBA, it's none of your concern. But the accounts are not for us, the accounts are for the members. As we are not the ones who are who you're doing the accounts for. You're actually doing the accounts for your members, so they should be available to your members, and they should be able to give explanations as to how they're investing and how they're handling the properties and so on. So trustees should remember that is the case. Of course, in our case, we also require the accounts, and we have also introduced penalties if you don't submit them to us. So trustees should make sure they do it in time. And the members should be able to see the various documents. Trustees should act in the interest of the beneficiaries, the best interest. So it's not just acting in good faith and with good intentions, but you should always act in a manner which is in the best interest of the beneficiaries. The powers of trustees should be exercised for that purpose and not for other purposes. It's good to exercise in an impartial manner, and you should show that you're doing things in good faith and at arm's length. The standard of care for a trustee is basically the care that you'd use in his own assets. So if you're a trustee, the question you ask yourself when you're making a decision about how to invest or how to treat the assets of the scheme should be, how would I do it if it were my own assets? If it was mine, would I do this? Would I invest in this plot if it was my own money? Or am I just doing it because it is somebody else's money? Or would I put it in this if it was my own money? So that is the standard of care that is expected of trustees. Discretion I mentioned, like the case I mentioned, trustees have power of discretion to make a decision, but it's important that this be as a result of an active mental process. The deliberations are key, and also situations must not arise as a result of inaction. Like the case I gave you, those trustees would have solved themselves a lot of problems if they made sure their members constantly updated the beneficiary nomination form. Because if they had a current form which was showing all the dependents and maybe giving percentages to all, they would easily have gone by that. If the member had signed, let's say, in the last few months before he died, it would have been very hard for somebody to contest something like that. But when you have a form which was filled 20 years ago, before some people were even born, some of the were born, then it puts you in a very difficult situation. So as trustees, you should not be forced to go use discretion because of your own failures to act reasonably. So let me come back to investments. It's true that a scheme can opt to form an investment committee of the board. So it's like a sub committee of the board. For those big schemes, which have a lot of investment decisions and so on. Excuse me. So the way the investment process works is at the top, you have investment guidelines, and I'm going to show you the guidelines. issued by us under the law, and this tells you where you can invest. Underneath that, you have what is called the investment policy statement. This is a document done by trustees, which says that these are the areas that we are ready to invest in, and this is the amounts or the percentages that we are ready to put into these areas in a broad, what we call strategic asset allocation. And then after that, now you have the fund manager who is given that policy and goes to implement it. He narrows those broad strategic allocations into what we call the tactical allocation, which is now the specific investment. And then he reports back to the board. The manager, of course, doesn't get the money. He just makes the decisions, but the money is held by the custodian who implements the actual investment. So that is how the investment process works. So as trustees, to monitor this process, you could form an investment committee, which will be looking at particularly the reports of the fund manager in great detail. And one of the things you can do in this investment committee is perhaps co-opt an independent person who has a lot of expertise. Because it's not necessarily true that you would have investment expertise in the board of trustees. Remember, I said half of the trustees are elected by members, the other half from the employer. It's unlikely that within that group you would have somebody who is very knowledgeable about investment. So you could form an investment committee and have an expert. You can ask KPMG to give you somebody who's an expert in investment to assist. But at the end of the day, the responsibility rests back up there with the trustees. It's something you can consider, where it does not absorb you from blame if things go wrong. So this committee would really exercise stewardship of the assets, review our performance, and provide regular reports to the full board, ensure that the fund manager is implementing the investment policy, and report any breach to the full board of trustees, and review investment results in terms of established standards of performance and adherence to the investment guidelines. And this is an area which is a bit of concern to us. Trustees sometimes fail to see the forest for the trees, or is it the trees for the forest? You will find trustees being very obsessed with short-term performance. So every quarter, they will rush to get some reports which are done by, some actuaries saying what is the average performance for that quarter. And then they will look at their own performance, and then they will say we have done well because we are higher than the average, or we have done poorly because we are less. And if they are less, then they will really harass the manager and say, how come you're doing less? And then they'll compare with another manager and say this one is better, and so on. But I think that is a bit misguided. On a quarterly basis, you don't expect all the schemes. A scheme performing less than average in one quarter does not necessarily mean that something is wrong. You're investing in volatile assets. There are those which will do well and those which will not do so well. So it's important for trustees to look at a kind of longer term horizon. When you have multiple managers, comparing them against each other may not add much value in the short term. You really need to look at a longer term horizon. And also, the investment policy does not have benchmarks of average industry performance or how other managers are performing. The benchmarks are normally indices which are well defined. So you should compare your performance against those indices. If it is inflation, if it is, the all share index or something like that, that is really what you should compare against. So sometimes I get very worried because I see a lot of emphasis on comparing quarterly performance across managers and against those reports and so on. But I think it's important for people to look at the bigger picture. So this is our framework. And as both John and Conrad said, we have a very progressive investment guidelines, which allows you to invest in all kinds of cutting-edge instruments. We are ahead of the curve because some of these things are not yet available in the market, but they are already allowed in the guidelines. Like the derivatives. Conrad said derivatives are coming. They're not yet come, but we already allow schemes to invest in them. Even the REITs, we only have like 2 which are available in the market, but we already allow for that. ETFs and so on, GRNs. We have pretty progressive investment guidelines. So this is what our schemes can invest in. They can invest in deposits in banks up to 30%. They can invest in bonds listed under CMA, listed in the stock exchange, up to 20%. They can invest in the non-listed debt instruments, like commercial papers and so on, up to 10%, so long as they have an investment grade rating by a credit rating agency. So you can invest in the listed space or even in the non-listed space in terms of debt instruments. They can invest in government securities up to 90%. And for government securities, we treat East Africa as a local market. So this 90% figure, you can as well invest it in the Uganda government bonds, Tanzania government bonds, South Sudan, Burundi, Rwanda. All of those are just treated as if they are local instruments. 2, we treat infrastructure bonds issued by public sector institutions as if they were government securities. So if KenGen issues a bond, which they have done, an infrastructure bond, we treat it as if the government which is issuing. If Kenya Power issues a government bond, okay, let me not use Kenya Power because somebody may say it's not really public. But let's say, Kenya Roads Board issues a bond for infrastructure, that will be treated as government securities. So that is really very flexible. There's a lot of opportunities to invest, for example, in infrastructure that we talked about. So if Kenya Roads Board wants to do a bridge like the one in Tanzania, they just need to issue a bond and our pension schemes will be able to invest. The shares, we allow up to 70%. And again, this is East Africa wide. And it also includes collective investment schemes, ETFs, GDRs, and so on. So again, very flexible. You can go to unlisted shares, and some have done this, but only up to 5%. The derivatives, 5%. Real estate investment trust, 30%. Private equity and venture capital, up to 10%. And this is an interesting one, again, because this is an unregulated investment. Most of the investments here are regulated by CMA or somebody else, but private equity and venture capital is an unregulated space, and you can put up to 10% there. Offshore, you can put up to 15%, but it's limited. You can't just invest in anything. For example, you can't invest in Bitcoins. When we say offshore, it has to be in those assets. Yeah, so I was saying offshore you can invest, but in bonds, in government securities, in shares, and so on. The property I talked about, 30%. The guaranteed funds, which is the insurance companies, you can put all your money there, and that's where most of the small schemes go. And we also have another provision for any other asset that is not captured here, but that one you would require to write to us as RBA for approval. For the rest, you don't come back to us, you just invest. But for any other assets, you would have to come to us. So quite a progressive investment guideline framework. How much is invested? The first one, the 30%, we have around 5% of assets there currently. The listed bonds, another 5%. Commercial paper, maybe 1%. Government securities, around 38%. Shares in the stock exchange, 22 or so percent. Unlisted equity, 0 point something. Derivatives, 0. Real estate investment trust, 0 point something. Private equity, 0 point something. Offshore, 15% is allowed, but actual investment is maybe 3% only, not much. Property, looking industry-wide, around 20% against the maximum of 30%. Guaranteed funds, around 12% of total assets. Any other assets, 0. So that is how we have invested. So let me wind up just quickly to mention about Big Four, where we are in terms of that. On the affordable housing, we have around 20% of assets there, like I said. A lot of that is in housing. We are given the example of Azina and many other estates. There's one just down the road here owned by one of the pension schemes, a nice housing development. So schemes are certainly participating in housing. The issue is that most of that housing is not the low-income housing. It is targeting the middle class and so on. And that is where we are working to perhaps add a new category here, which will be very specific for investment in either housing or infrastructure through PPP route. Because the PPP route is the route that is likely to give us the affordable housing. Maybe the government will provide land, a private investor comes and does the actual houses, and then the pension schemes can invest into maybe a debt instrument issued by that project. And we have a number of schemes which are keen on investing in that area. In healthcare, we recently did a new innovation, which is called the Post-Retirement Medical Fund. What this basically means is that while you're a member of a scheme and you're still working, you can save some money into this fund through the pension scheme. And then when you reach retirement, that fund is used to buy for you medical cover for the rest of your life. Because the biggest cost for retirees is actually medical. So if you can pre-fund, and then when you retire, you just get the cover, you don't worry about medical, you're left with your pension to do other things, but medical is taken care of. So that is now in place. Sorry, the typo there. The guidelines are actually just awaiting gazettement with the Attorney General. Manufacturing, I mentioned PE. We have increasing investment in private equity now. I think we have 3 billion in terms of commitments. And those PE firms are investing in SMEs in the manufacturing space and so on. So we are now seeing pension schemes moving into that area. There's a lot of interest, and we'll see more money coming there. Agriculture is where we have not done much, but we're also working on a project to see whether we can securitize. Like Conrad said, once you have a flow of income, it's always possible to securitize, and then that opens the door for pension schemes to invest. So if you have a farm where there's going to be a certain flow of income, you can securitize. The only thing that is different about farming is that there's another risk which is not there in other sectors. You can have like crop failure or disease and so on. But that is a risk which is easily mitigated through insurance. And, in the past, we used to have insurance which was very hard to prove. As a farmer, you would have crop insurance, for example, but it would be very hard to prove that your crop has failed. But now the market has evolved, and we now have, index-based, for example, insurance. So if you are growing some crops, the determinant as to whether you should be paid is not going to be somebody coming to your farm to check whether the crops are there or not. It's going to be, for example, how much rainfall fell. And that is something which is verifiable. it's not something debatable. If we say so long as rain is less than 20 millimeters, you're going to be paid, then you're paid because the statistics of the rain are there. So that kind of development is enabling us to securitize agricultural flows and to bring on board pension scheme investment. So just to conclude, trustees are responsible for managing the scheme. They have to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries. They should make sure the funds are properly invested. And to do so, it's important for them to be knowledgeable. And that is why forums like this are very important because it gives us a chance to meet with trustees and share more information about how they can do their role. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mtuku, for that very detailed presentation and highlighting the trustees' role, especially to get a more understanding of what exactly they have to do in the pension funds. I'll welcome questions in the audience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mtuku, for that wonderful presentation. Richard is my name, from Uganda. I just wanted to understand from the East African region perspective what Kenya has done extremely well to have all the fundamentals going right. From your statistics, I can see the AUMs have significantly grown from 2001 to where they are currently. I can see the number of players in the market have also greatly increased, and your percentage coverage in the labor market has also greatly increased compared to the other two sister countries. So just wanted to understand from your side what you're doing well or for best practice for us to be able to take home to improve our coverage as well. Thank you.
What we did well is that we put in place a very a framework which builds a lot of confidence because our framework has a lot of checks and balances. We have the regulator up there who is looking at the whole industry with a risk-based approach. We have the trustees. We have the manager doing the investments. We have the custodian having the assets. And then we have the administrator who is like keeping the records and so on. And all these people are required to report to us. All these people are required to whistle blow if they see something wrong. You know, there's these checks and balances. Before we came, one person could be doing all those roles. Like the example I gave of, some scheme where they're investing. There was no manager, there was no custodian. The trustees would just invest directly how they wanted. That trustee could as well be the CEO of the company, selling the plots to his own scheme and so on. In that environment, things could not really go very far. But when we brought in place this system with all these checks and balances, at least the money was now safeguarded, and that's why it has grown so fast. And also people have confidence because at the end of the day, ours is actually a voluntary system. So if people have no confidence, then they will not put money in. But because they can see this structure, which is having all these safeguards, they're able to put in their money. So it is actually the structure and the governance framework which is in the Act, which has enabled us to achieve this this growth.
Mr. Mtuku, thanks for a very comprehensive and informative presentation. First, I'll start off with a comment, then a question later. So one of the things which I've actually observed, I've seen in this market is that, if you're looking at other markets, you'll find that the markets tend to be ahead of the regulators in terms of doing things. But this is a market which is very unique, whereby the regulators actually are ahead of the market. The reason why I'm saying that is that, regulators have actually done a lot of good work, whereby they have brought in a lot of products for the markets to invest in. but yet the market, I think, is taking time to embrace the product and actually invest in those. But regulators have done everything they could in their power, based on my observation, to make sure that they've got adequate products to diversify their investment risk and also to have a long-term benefit on their portfolio. But I see something different from the market itself. Maybe they're going to take their own time to understand and also embrace the products, probably. Now, what I've also observed when I interacted with various stakeholders in the market, I'm talking about your asset managers and asset consultants, is that it confirms the point that you have made, that most of, of the stakeholders are actually short-termers. In other words, they're looking for a short-term, return. They're looking at, your quarterly report as the most important thing. So obviously, financial crises that happened in the past have taught us that, a well-diversified portfolio must achieve two things. It must achieve a long-term sustainable return as well as risk management. So it looked to me that the country is, the industry is much more focusing only on short-term return and less on risk management. So maybe it looks like it's a cartel. So as a regulator, what role do you think you can actually play to make sure that they actually embrace both kind of strategies?
It's a good point. It's of a lot of concern to us. And perhaps we are to blame because, for example, we are the ones who require, and actually we don't. We used to require quarterly reports, but we said that we should have half-yearly reports. We thought, that will reduce the short-termism. But the trustees still insist on getting quarterly reports from the manager. Though ourselves as RBA, we moved from quarterly to half-yearly in an attempt to make people think a bit longer term. But I think we are the ones who have gone out and told trustees that you have to be seen to be doing the best interest of your beneficiaries. But I think we did not explain to them that that does not mean that every quarter you should be having the best performance. I think, and it's one of the issues that we are bringing on board in the trustee program, development program. We want to train trustees to think more long-term. So I'm saying we are also to blame because maybe we never made it clear to trustees from the beginning that it's not just looking at quarterly reports, it's looking at the long term. But the strategy that we have is to embed it into the curriculum that we are reviewing for TDPK, so that we focus more on long-term thinking. And at the same time, we'll solve the first problem because we are going to embed into that curriculum more discussion of alternative investments. Right now, it is really focused on bonds and shares and deposits and so on and property. But we want to bring more information about the private equity, the REITs, the derivatives, and all these other alternatives that are coming. So the solution really is an education one, and it's something that we are going to address very soon.
I also have some questions. Thank you, Mr. Mutuku, for a very informative presentation. My name is Washington Oluoch from Kenya Pipeline Retirement Scheme. I'm a trustee. My questions are, in the DB, is it a must that annual increments or periodical increments should be affected to pensioners? Because that's an issue which is bothering us. The second thing is I wanted to know what the RBA control is on provident funds, because provident funds are also saved for pensions, and RBA is there for pensions. Also, there's a general feeling that NSSF funds, which again are meant for pensions, are not managed well. We have seen a lot of projects which were like white elephants or overpriced. And actually, when we talk about that, the PPP, some of the schemes are feeling that they may be overpriced, and therefore the pension schemes may not benefit. So what would be the role of RBA as far as Provident Funds and NSSF funds are concerned? Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Pension increase, because of voluntary system, the law doesn't mandate that you must give pension increase, but it does say that when you're doing your triannual actuarial valuation for the DB scheme, that should be one of the first things to look at when there is, excess money, and you want to know what to do with the surplus that you have. Pension increase should be one of the things, but it's not a must that you have annual pension increments in our system. You can only do that in a mandatory system where you have said that everybody must have a scheme and they must contribute so much. That is where maybe you could do that. But in a voluntary system, you can't force people because at the end of the day, it's the sponsor who will have to put in the money. You can't force sponsors to do that. So we don't have mandatory pension increase. Provident versus pension. In our system, you can go either way. The Provident basically just means that when you reach retirement age, you can actually be paid all your money in one lump sum. And that is the end of your association with that scheme. In the pension scheme, when you reach retirement age, you can get some amount in lump sum, normally up to 1/3, and then the rest is paid to you as pension every month for the rest of your life. So we allow both, and we have both types in our system. However, just because you're in a provident fund and you get a lump sum does not mean that you just need to take it. You can also opt to buy an annuity, which will basically convert your lump sum to pension. And to you, it will be the same actually. And that's what we encourage people to do, those who are in the provident funds, because when you get just a lump sum, chances of it lasting very long are not high. There's always a risk of, even for those with good intentions, there's always a risk of losing and then being left with nothing. So I encourage people to go to annuities, ensures you are NSF is regulated by us, so all the rules I've been talking about do apply as we speak. And we have seen a lot of improvement in terms of the way they run the scheme and the investments and so on. A lot of the issues that you're mentioning occurred in the past, either before our act came or during a period when they were exempted, because there have been some periods when they have been given exemption from our act for whatever reason. So during those periods and the previous period is when you saw a lot of some of those abuses. But now NSF complies to the act. All the requirements we talk about, they do. As John showed in his presentation, they had to appoint, they used to do the investments themselves, but they had to appoint managers. There are 5 managers who are holding 145 billion of NSF assets. Those managers are investing them just like they invest for the other pension schemes. So I think going forward, those things of the past will not be there.
Thank you, Bwana Mutuku, for your good presentation. RBA is actually doing an excellent job in managing the pension industry. I have 2 questions. In Kenya, we have most of the public servants, especially the senior management team, on short-term contracts. And most of them are not in the pension scheme. You talked about working on the informal sector, and I would call this as, well, it's formal sector, but they are not on pension schemes. So on retirement, they end up not having any money or any income. So what is RBA doing about this stuff? Because being senior management or being senior citizen who had a good income, have no income at the end of the day, become a burden to the society. The other question is on one of your roles or responsibilities, protection of the members' interest, where you monitor the pension schemes, how they are managed, My question is, who protects the trustees? Because you receive complaints from the members and you address those complaints, and that means the trustees are in trouble, yet they have implemented all the duties as per the regulations. So who protects them? Thank you very much.
Thank you for those good questions. Contracts, from a retirement preparation perspective, you're right, is a disaster because in the pension scheme, the money is outside of the sponsor, and it is invested and it grows. And even if the sponsor was to close, the pension money is separate. Most of these contracts provide for gratuities, which are not funded. So if the sponsor closes in the middle of your contract, not only do you lose your job, but you don't even get the gratuity because there's nobody to pay you the gratuity. If that had been a pension, you would still have gotten your pension. So for us, from the policy perspective, it is wrong. And we raise the same with the Public Service Commission, that, this thing of forcing people to go to gratuity. Contract in itself is not bad because you can be on contract and still be in the pension scheme. And even that contract could provide for the employer to contribute to the pension scheme. You don't have to provide for gratuity. It could as well provide for the employer to contribute to the pension scheme, which would be better. But it's like PSC has been pushing for the gratuity route, and we have raised that. So I agree with you totally. If you look like in my case, for example, I was acting CEO for quite a while. I was still on the pension scheme. I was getting the contribution. And then when I was confirmed, they said, now you have to take you out and put you on gratuity. I said, what? How can the CEO of RBA not be in the pension scheme? So, in my case, I said I will just continue in the scheme. At least my own contribution, I still make it into the scheme. I even increased it because now that there's no employer's contribution, I had to now increase from my side. Which I thought was very unfortunate because we are the regulator, and yet here we are saying the CEO is being removed from his own pension scheme. So I agree with you totally, that is wrong, and it's something we have actually raised with the PSC, so that even if people are on contracts, because they want not just CEOs now, but even all the heads of department and so on to go to contract, let them go on contract, but let them remain in the pension scheme. Protection of trustees. We are there to protect trustees as well. We have had cases where trustees are actually being victimized by sponsors. Somebody is in the scheme. The CEO of the company is putting pressure on them to do something, and they come to us, and we actually are able to assist them. So as trustees, don't worry. We are not only there for the members, we're also there for you. If you have an issue, we can also look at how we can assist you. How it's true the Act says that we are supposed to protect the members and the sponsors, but one of the ways of doing that is also protecting the trustees. So we are there for you.
Okay, good morning. So just a quick one. As a regulation authority, to what extent do you involve the schemes in coming up with the asset allocations? And then second one is how much frequently do you go down to sit and able to readjust the asset allocations as compared to the changes that is taking place on the world market?
We look at the investment guidelines all the time because we are always cognizant of developments in the market, and actually we have changed them quite frequently. We have changed them quite frequently. Once in a while, you'll see we have increased something from 15 to 30 or something like that, or we have brought a new category and so on. Like I said, right now we have a proposal to bring a new category for PPP, for housing and infrastructure. So it's a continuous process. But all our policy process always involves the industry. So what we do, remember I talked about the research papers. When we do those research papers, we call industry players, schemes, and also service providers, and so on, and we present to them those papers and the policy recommendations coming from those papers. Like earlier on this year, we were in this very hotel disseminating the papers from the previous research that we had done. And then every year as we go towards budget, we normally submit as a specific memorandum to the Treasury for changes that we want to be included during the budget speech. And that memorandum, we also call stakeholders again to go through it before we submit it. So like this year, we had a number of forums in Nairobi. Actually, we did Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu, where we said this is what we have come up with from our research, from submissions from the industry, and so on. These are the proposals that we are taking to Treasury, and people commented on them and gave us input and so on, which we factored in before we submitted the memorandum. And then after the budget, we went back. There was a function, a breakfast function the other day, where we went back and said, now, this is what we had proposed, this is what has come out. Because remember, I said we only advise. So we gave advice, but some of it is rejected, another is accepted. So we go back to the industry and say, this is what has come out. So it's a very consultative process. Yeah.
Thank you. Could we give a huge thank you to the Chief Executive? Thank you so much. Thank you. If anybody, I saw a few hands coming up, but we're running short of time. If you have a question for the Chief Executive, please approach him in the networking few minutes that we'll be having after the closing session. Ladies and gentlemen, first, I'd like to thank you all in respect of all your capacities, those who have traveled long journeys all around the world, especially from Singapore, South Africa, Zambia, Uganda, but last and not least, the hosts of this event, who are the Kenyans. We want more of these to go around, not only in Kenya, but also to take this as a very big example for other East African countries, Central, West, South, and even including North Africa, because we are concentrating more on the sub-Saharan Africa. So, and yet we talk about the Pearl of Africa. So let's include all African countries, but not only sub-Saharan countries. Let's focus on that. So I'd like to thank you all for having participated and asking questions continuously, and not to give up or getting tired of actually doing that. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm going to close this event and by giving a brief background of the organizers that you've been seeing around since the beginning of the event, walking around, organizing, and you've seen the banners, the boards, but you don't know what is behind that. So I want you to understand it, because it's not the first event, we're doing more and more. The major organizer of this event is ABMC, and we've got the chief executive, who is Joseph. Joseph, can you please wave around so that they can see you? The headquarters are based in Nairobi, and we've also got Victoria in the finance behind there. Victoria. We've got other staff from ABMC, which I'll not mention, but we've also got our videographer, Abdu, who has managed this event since the beginning. I'll talk briefly about ABMC. ABMC International is the leading training conference service provider based and registered as a legal entity in Nairobi, Kenya. It is an international affiliated business intelligence company that provides any organization that wishes to work with them within the corporate learning and development solutions at a regional and international level by meeting the day needs of competencies and skills required to stay ahead of the industry, not only the pension, HR, finance, engineering, and leadership in management. It organizes and manages events for both national and international level. It's got international partnerships in America, Canada, and London. And not to forget, our next event that is going to be managed. This is in your handouts. Our next event, similar to this one, similar topic, but on a broader and wider perception, which is going to be our third conference of the OPTIC, of the Africa Pension Trustees Investment Consortium Summit, will take place in Dubai, which is one of our training favorite places. I've done a lot of work in Dubai, in Marina, and with ABMC, and that is scheduled to be on the 20th to 22nd of February, 2019. So anybody who wishes to join us, this is going to be a wider event, and anybody would ask, why do you take it from Mombasa to Dubai? It will come back to Kenya, but we want the world to get to know what is actually going on around in Africa, and to compare different. It's not bad to compare. So why in this region? The Middle East is one of the biggest investment in real estate investment. And Africa has countries which are considered emerging markets and frontiers, such as Rwanda, which is coming up very broadly in financial services, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. It is always the Middle East, especially Dubai, is looking for investment ventures in Africa. Recently, it did a partnership with the Tourism and Safari here in Kenya. And if people want to holidays in respect of safari, which the Middle East doesn't have, they already have a partnership to come here. So they are managed in Dubai, but then they travel here in Kenya. So that is already going on. So that is the reason why we chose that region. Another thing that I want to speak about is my organization and understanding who your chairman host is. First of all, we've got my names are Farida Bujimba Kachama Bujirita. They missed one last name. I've got so many names. I'm a Ugandan, born in Uganda and born and bred in Uganda. My parents are both Ugandans. I've been very lucky and to have managed to gain all this experience in this sector. I left Uganda in 1998, and after graduating shortly and working in the banking sector in Uganda, which exposed me to the straight away to the investment sector. I worked in Kampala for a year, and then I went to United Kingdom to do my master's degree, which I majored in the financial decision making in United Kingdom, which I passed and went straight away in the financial sector. So I've been very lucky to work with very big, massive companies all over the world, based in UK, like Legal & General, assurance company, which is worth over trillions. I've managed, I've had positions whereby I've managed several investments for pension funds,